Hey folks, once again, I want to thank our sponsor for today's episode, RevenueCat. RevenueCat is the way for app developers to integrate in-app purchases in your app. If you ever looked at the API when it comes to StoreKit, you know how complex it can be checking receipts, certificates, and then using that data to actually get a hold of your customers and, be able to keep them informed of what's going on and deals that are coming up. So you know how important it is to have a tool like RevenueCat in your toolbox. RevenueCat makes it easy for folks like you, app developers, to build, analyze, and grow in-app purchases. Not only for iOS, but also Android and web if you're on those platforms as well. There's no server code required, they do it all for you. So for you, it's just a few lines of code to get in-app purchase infrastructure, analytics, and integrations without managing servers. They're reasonable prices, and they are friendly for app developers like yourself. If you don't know how complex StoreKit can be, I definitely recommend checking out the episode I did a few months ago with Andy Bodea, where we talk about the complexities of StoreKit and keeping track of your customers and receipts. So definitely check that link in the show notes below. Also, there's some really great tutorials out there and really great videos on their YouTube channel. So I'll post a link to that as well, talking about how important and powerful their dashboard is so you can constantly track your customers and know what's going on. So after you listen to this episode, go into the link in the show notes below and sign up for RevenueCat. Seriously, it's totally easy to get started and they're very reasonably priced. It's totally worth your time to check it out. I want to thank RevenueCat for sponsoring today's episode. Welcome to another episode of Empower Apps. I'm your host, Leo Dian. Today, I'm joined once again by Jordan Morgan. Jordan, thank you so much for coming back on, especially in this series.
Yeah, absolutely. I was excited to get the invite. It'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So you're episode number 4. I figured out of all the returning guests that I should have on when it comes to indie apps, I figured you, since you're writing a whole book series on this and you have some experience that other indie devs don't have. Before we get started, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah. I'm Jordan Morgan. I've been dabbling in the indie scene for quite a while. Been kind of doing everything in that little indie spectrum or umbrella, whatever you want to call it, in terms of writing. I love writing on my blog, shipping apps, and doing now content work with the book series. So yeah, been in iOS, I guess, since 2011 now. So a little bit.
It seems like a banner year for a lot of people, because that was me too. It was like 2011. I built my first iPad app for an employer. So yeah, something about that. That's just when the tipping point, right? How did you?
Well, it's right when Arc got started, so you didn't have to deal with memory management around that time. So I remember that was like a big thing for me. I was like, oh, now it's a lot eeasier.
I think I did have to do some retain release. Unfortunately, I was caught right before that. How did you become an indie? Yeah, right. Going from garbage collection to that. How did you become an indie developer?
Yeah, well, I think it's like what a lot of people do. You just have ideas that you want to explore and see them out in the world. And I think once you ship that first app, there's almost no turning back, whether it's a success or just an abysmal failure, which my first several, were. But, I just kind of got hooked on that dream build release cycle and just kind of been doing it ever since. But yeah, I mean, the scene has grown so much since then. I think for the better. There's a lot of people doing it now in all sorts of spectrums, whether it's part-time, full-time, somewhere in between. But I think the shortest answer is it's just something I really enjoy, and I don't ever see myself getting tired of it up to this point. So I just keep doing it.
So did you start off as an indie developer, or were you employed and then you got into indie development?
Yeah, it was it's always been through employers. It's been like the side hustle thing. And, it's such an interesting topic because it always kind of comes down to when people talk to me about like time management, like having a job, indie apps, being married, having kids, all these things. But yeah, so I've always done it as a side thing with an employer where I work today. I work at Buffer and do iOS for them. It's a very side project friendly place. So it's worked out really well.
Nice. How have you matured in what ideas you pick when you want to build an app?
That's such a great one. So I know we'll get to it later, but that's actually something I just wrote about in the book series I'm doing, and it was in the design portion. Because before you design something, you have to know like what it is you're designing, right? So this is something I really struggled with. Like I think there's like two parts. Like you have this idea, you have this big like grand ambitions on what this app can be. And it always looks clean and easy and defined in your head. But then when like you open Xcode or you open the pen and paper to like define it, that's when you get down to like the nitty gritty and really trying to cut some stuff away or actually figuring out what's going on or what the app's going to be. So for me, I think when it comes down to what I would build now, it's kind of shifted over the years. In the beginning, it was about enjoyment, right? Like I'm going to have fun doing this. And that's the only reasoning I'm doing. That's the only reason, right? It doesn't matter if it sucks, if it fails, no one buys it. I'm going to have fun. Now I've kind of strayed way far away from that, actually. Like I still want to build things I enjoy. That's a proponent. But I also look critically at the market and the opportunities for it to, monetize and make money. And I kind of alluded to this in the time management thing. Like, I feel like at this point in my life, I can't justify working on apps unless it brings like a monetary benefit to me and my family. So for example, with any profits that I make from apps or now the book series, like, that's where it goes to. It goes to like kids' college funds, to, family vacations, all these things. So I kind of justify it that way. Like if I'm going to spend time doing this, I'm going to take it seriously. I'm going to enjoy what I build, but I'm going to make sure that it has a chance to succeed. So I come up with an idea. I look at the market. I look at competitors. I see what the opportunity and the landscape looks like. I look at the time investment and seeing how hard or not hard it'll be. And then I go from there. And I actually just had a tweet about this earlier. I set up like this little table in notes evaluating the next app idea I want to do from 3 of them. And like those were some of the columns, right? It was like enjoyment, marketability, monetization aspects, and then I just weighted all those scores and went with the one that was the highest. So not exactly a scientific route, but it was good enough for me. But I do think a lot
that makes
about
a lot
that.
of sense. Yeah. Do you like so when it comes to like researching the market, I assume you use like ASO type tools like sponsor app figures or something like that to just look at like competitors in that market and to see if it's like even worthwhile, I guess.
It's a part in the tool chain, sure. I usually go high level in the beginning. So, for example, the app idea that I have now that I'm working around, it was kind of unique in that I didn't really find any competitors, which is either a very good thing or a very bad thing. It's like good because it's like, maybe I have a new market. Bad because it's like nobody wants this. That's why it doesn't exist after 15 years of the App Store or whatever. So we'll find out soon, I hope. But yeah, so I look at that, and what I do is I try to really keep it simple for myself because I'm someone who can go way into the weeds with all of this stuff. Like we hear about feature creep in terms of indie apps, like it took so long to get this out the door because I kept adding stuff. I do feature creep on every step of the way if I don't keep myself in check. Like when I'm researching apps, I'm like, oh, you know what? I need a brand new template for this in Notion or CraftDocs or whatever. I'm like, oh, maybe I should share this with everyone. Ooh, maybe this is a product actually. So I have to really pump the brakes. And so what I do is I just pick 3. Is there 3 competitors out there? Great. And then I just do 3 more things from each of them. 3 good things, 3 bad things, 3 opportunities. And I just keep it as simple as that.
Oh, that's awesome. I like that. That's super simple. Do you build like a landing page or anything to see if there's an audience out there?
Yes and no. So I think about those a little bit differently. For the book series, I did do that. I got the landing page up first, and I got the email capture, and I had like an internal metric. Like if 500 people sign up for this, then I'll do it. For apps, I don't really do that. I would try it. I'm not against it. I just haven't personally done it yet. So for the next app I'm working on, I'm kind of just going to go like the stealth app release. Like I'm just going to do it. I'm going to try like boots on the ground marketing stuff, traditional social paid advertising, to see what I can get going there. It really depends on the app type. I mean, if it's something that's more indie friendly, then Twitter's a great spot for that. But I kind of want to do this experiment where I just don't really tell anybody what I'm doing and then come back like 6 months later and say, all right, here's the app I shipped 6 months ago. I didn't even tweet about it. I did nothing. I just did traditional, user acquisition, and here's what happened. I always thought that would be a fun experiment. Because, part of the fun with shipping apps is you share it on Twitter, the process and all that, and I love that. But this one, I'm just going to get something out the door as quick as I can, and then just come back and say, here's what happened.
Interesting. So for you, how do you decide what an MVP is? And like, as opposed to like, obviously, like you said, getting into feature creep, which we all are tempted to do when we're building an app.
Yeah, it's another great question. So it's something that I've learned more and more over the years is when you write down, like you have this document of what this app's going to be, you have to take each bullet point that you add seriously, because if I create an MVP for an app and I put down like all these things and then I go and do those, you don't realize the weight of the time investment of those things until you actually start developing it. And so I don't really even add ideas that I don't think I'm going to do for version 1. Even like that, I'll do this later, because later may never come. You may not ship the app. You may be tired of it. You may get bored. Whatever, there's so many things that happen along the way of developing app that makes it drop off, for good reasons and bad. So for me, again, just reining in my thought process. When I get the MVP of an app, it comes from the mission statement or the, whatever you want to call that. I've heard a few different terms for it, but like the stated purpose of the app, the elevator pitch, the one sentence. So like if my app does X, then those 3 I'm going to pick out like maybe 3 features, not even marquee features, 3 features or things that support that mission statement. And I'll write those down, and that's what I'm going to work towards. All the other stuff, that's great. It's going to come later. I don't even really write them down. I just don't commit to anything else except those 3 things. And that's the only way I've really found that I can develop apps in a way that's actually going to ship, ways that's actually going to get them out the door. Otherwise, it's going to be what happened with my app SpendStack, where I worked on it for like 5 years. And while that was fun and I have good memories of it, I don't want to do that again ever. I want to get things out the door quicker, test assumptions faster, and get people on board at a lot faster than I have before. So if anything, I've learned to think more of like a true small business owner than an indie developer, because in my world, when you think of indie developer, it's like you're just kind of freewheeling, shipping stuff that you want to for fun. And this is me. I'm not saying this is what the scene is like. This is me. And, you're just kind of for the love of the game, if you will. Whereas when I think of myself more as a small business owner, I'm like, okay, so I actually have a product that I need to get out and ship to see if it's going to make any money. And if not, then at least for my stated purpose, then it's kind of wasting time. So it's okay to fail and it's okay to crater, but you're not going to know if you're going to crater, fail, or succeed until something's actually on the App Store for a little bit.
Right, exactly. So I want to get a little bit into the weeds of the code. What are some APIs you've been learning recently and applying in your apps?
So this is going to be the most generic answer known to mankind, but it is the truthful answer. I've been leaning a lot more into SwiftUI recently. We've used it at Buffer ever since it came out, and now it's to the point where it's our default framework. So when we have new features, we write them in SwiftUI. So
I know you got a widget, so I mean that you kind of have to.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing that we are shipping soon this is just crazy impressive. This is one of those SwiftUI moments where I was like, this is insane. We wanted to have a way for people to view the app before they committed to like sign up for it. And so we were like, what if we do this tour, show people around the app. And so we literally rebuilt the whole UI of the entire app in SwiftUI in like a week, so people,
I guess it'll be in the App Store by the time this episode comes out, but yeah.
Ish, maybe. We're still like, tweaking some things. But anyway, so we rebuilt the whole app. And to be fair, like there's little alerts that show when you click on something like, hey, this is what this would do. So it's not fully functional, but it is the whole UI of the whole app.
Okay, got you.
That we built
of the tour. Nice. Yeah. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. So I'm getting a lot more comfortable with it. I mean, I've always known how to use it. I could always build an app in it. But I'm all about like polishing those rough edges, which, you can say whatever you want about SwiftUI. Some people say it's not possible to do that. Some people say it is. All I know is what's possible for me. And I'm getting to the point where I can, I know enough about the framework to kind of work around those things and polish things up. So yeah, I've been using SwiftUI heavily. And then for things where I really have hit personal performance limits with it, kind of in scrolling and in lists and things like that, I dropped down to UIKit and hey, UIKit's better than it ever has been. It's great, especially when you tack on Combine with it. So it's like a brand new world we're living in a lot of ways in the last just 2 years of iOS, and it's really exciting. Right. But I know SwiftUI is the hot answer right now. It's what everyone wants to learn, but it is the thing I'm leaning on most these days, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, though. So one of the things I wanted to ask you kind of brought up is, do you feel like as an employee at Buffer, your indie experience has helped you as an employee? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. The answer is a resounding yes. And the great thing about Buffer, and I get this question a lot, like, why do you have a day job? I've been asked by friends and family that. I share numbers every now and then with the Best in Class book, but it did over 100,000 in like 5 months, so it's like enough to support yourself and a family if you really wanted to. And the short answer is that Buffer supports me so much in side projects, and my side projects support me so much in Buffer that as long as I have the bandwidth to do both, like I'm gonna do both. And not to get in a tangent about how much healthcare is in the United States, but that's another big factor too. But yeah, so Buffer started out as a side project with our CEO, Joel. He did what we mentioned earlier before it was in style. He put up this landing page for Buffer, did the email capture, and you signed up, and it was like, hey, we're not ready yet, but we will be. And he was like the king of MVPs, so much so that one story that he told me one time, this was hilarious, because I never would have done this, which is why I don't have a $20 million a year business like he does. But he got Buffer out so quick that when people signed up, he would wake up the next day and flip a Boolean flag in like a MySQL database to say that they were a paid customer. So like they didn't even get it right away. Like he had to wake up and say that, oh yes, like it has paid true. So he's got so much side project experience. It's insane. Even on our work trips, before COVID had annual retreats, and he would always sit down with me one-on-one and talk about side projects. I was like, hey, here's what I'm thinking with SpendStack. What do you think? He's like, well, here's how I would think about it. Here's how I would get it out. And hey, I actually used it. Here's what I liked. Here's what kind of confused me. So it's a huge luxury. And it's like anyone who has a side project, this is like the dream job for it. Because I know not everyone gets that affordance. Like some jobs don't allow side projects. Some are like, yeah, you can do it, but be hush-hush. Buffer, we even have a channel in Slack that's like, show us what you're making. So it really embraces that maker/entrepreneur side of people, and it encourages that. And so I take code and things that I learned from my indie stuff and I put it in Buffer, and then vice versa. So SwiftUI is a perfect example. I mean, we just built the whole app, like I said, in SwiftUI from a UI standpoint. And there are things that I learned in that process that are helping me with the app that I'm baking in the oven right now. So it's very beneficial. I get twice the learning with the same amount of time. So as long as I can keep that train rolling, I will.
That's awesome. So last time, one of the APIs, I don't know if we talked about it in the last episode you were on, but you used a considerable amount of CloudKit in SpendStack, correct?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The whole syncing layer was all CloudKit.
How was your experience with that, and would you choose that again?
Experience with it was great. Would I choose it again is a longer-winded answer, so we'll get to that one. So the experience, I think, so it is different now than when I started, but today you can have the NS persistent cloud core data store thing. I forget what it's even called.
Right.
You can do that, which is kind of like here's out of the box syncing. Or you can kind of use the open source layers for it, or kind of roll your own. And by roll your own, I mean you use CloudKit, but you build their APIs and build off their APIs and make the syncing kind of on your own behalf. I did that route. And if I was using CloudKit today, it's the same thing I would do. I had complete control. There was no black box of syncing that you kind of get with the all-in-one solutions. Which
you did your own
very
syncing
hard.
with core data.
I didn't use core data. It was a SQLite is what I used for all the persistence.
But you did your own syncing between local storage and cloud data. Got it.
Yeah. So it was great for syncing because I knew exactly what was going on, and sharing was a little bit more complicated back then. You had to establish the relationships up front because you had a root record that had child records, and then you wanted to share that root, and then it would trickle down and share everything else. All of that has been enhanced since then, but I think if you do CloudKit, that's just the way to go. It's so much easier once you get the big ideas down, it's so much easier to know where things could be going wrong, or what might be working, what might not be working if you're the one that wrote it. And there's really only a few core concepts with CloudKit. I know it's intimidating at first, but I mean, once you get the idea of, record zones and the relationships and all those things squared away and how the subscriptions work, you're really off and running really quick. So I remember the first time I got a shared list working in SpendStack, it was this thing of is it really this simple? This was it? I just found an obscure Apple sample code that was in the archive at the time, and that was it. That was all I needed. I just based it all off that. It is hard to get going, but yeah. Would I use it again? It's hard to know because I would have to say what my goals are beyond syncing, because as anyone knows who read my acquisition of SpendStack post, you're locked in with that developer count once you turn on the CloudKit entitlement, and you can't transfer the app out. And I know some people think that's way too forward thinking, but I mean, if your app, does successful, it's, pretty realistic that it could get acquired depending on if you want to move on to something else, or Whatever the reasons may be, it's never been more accessible to have your app acquired than it is today. So I don't know if I would use it again for that reason, because it means I would need a different developer account per app. But is it the best experience for syncing on the iOS platforms, which is something I really care about? I think, yeah, because you don't have to set up an account or any of that or run the server. It's just they have an Apple ID. They have, cloud access. Then there's your syncing layer. So I wish that stipulation wasn't in place, because then it would be an unabashed yes, I would use it every single time.
Do you think that's a technical thing, or do you think, like, what did you end up having to do, I guess?
Yeah, so what ended up happening with SpendStack is they just bought my entire business. So Dreaming in Binary was the business that they bought, and its IP was SpendStack. So that's kind of how it had to go. From a legal standpoint, it didn't really make the acquisition trickier. It was just like, oh, okay, so we have to buy the whole thing. Like, I didn't say, hey, this is going to actually be more because I'm selling my business. It was like, no, SpendStack was the business. So for me, it was a one-to-one relationship there, so it made it a bit easier. But I think on Apple's side, I would imagine it's some technical limitation that ties these containers to developer accounts. I've heard of maybe some exceptions being made. I don't know if that's true or not, but they don't seem interested in changing it. And to me, the wins they would get from changing it are pretty high. But since they haven't, it must be kind of a high effort kind of a thing to do. I would assume. So it's all speculation and conjecture on my end, but I would assume, yeah, some sort of technical hurdles are in place to make that easy for them to allow.
Did you have other properties under your company that you had to also sell?
Yeah, but they were all dead in the water apps that had long been off the App Store. And it was actually funny looking through those, because there are some apps I forgot about from like 2011, 2012. A few of them that I had made that just, did the typical, my friends and family downloaded it the first day, and then it was off into the App Store void from there. So technically, yeah. So there was more things that they got out of it, but it wasn't anything that mattered. No.
Okay. So what other, I guess let's, if you don't mind, we could dive a little bit more into your experience selling your app.
Sure.
How did that work out, and how did that go?
Yeah, so it worked out well. It was kind of a whirlwind experience because I had first talked about getting the app acquired with my wife, because at this time SpendStack was a big part of like our family. She knew I'd been working on it for so long, and that it was important to me. But COVID had just started right around then, and we were building a house, and a lot was in flux with that. Like I don't know if you heard about like lumber prices during that time. Like they were just going up and down. It was insane.
Right now, so trust me.
It was a trip. Yeah. So I needed like a good injection of cash for me to feel really good about going forward with the house. And so I reached out to one of my friends, David Bernard, who has experience in that area, had a few apps acquired, and kind of asked him, his advice. And then at that same time, another party had reached out about getting it. And so all at once, I had reached out, someone else had reached out, and then I got introduced to the third party who ended up being the person that I went with to buy it. So I was kind of weighing these different ways that I could go with it. And I ended up choosing the route that I did and feel pretty good about it. And the interesting thing is it wasn't the one that had the highest offer, but it was the one that I thought would, kind of steward the app forward and bring it off into its next little stage of life. But it was a great experience to go through. I learned some things. There are things I'll do differently next time if I do sell another app. But it was exciting, to actually see that number come through, which was NDA'd, by the way. That's why I'm not saying it right here and now. I don't know if that's how all those deals usually go, but to see that like number, shown, and then like to see it in your bank account, it was like this proud moment of like something I just made from nothing, just made me all this money, and like now I can go build this house for my family. So it was a huge thing for me. It felt great, it was a lot of fun. And I hope more people go through it too. I think a lot of people in the tech world kind of assume, and I know I did, maybe I'm putting words in other people's mouth, but I thought this way, like, acquisitions are only for like, these huge SaaS companies, right? The big players, like, these mega deals, like in the video game industry, like Microsoft just bought Activision Blizzard for like 70 billion. But, acquisitions happen all the time. And now there's even platforms for it. And the one that I'm thinking of really escapes. MicroAcquire. MicroAcquire is a big one now. There's Flippa, of course. I didn't use any of those, but it's like, if you have an app that has users and makes money, like you could you could sell it. You probably could. So I think that's exciting for indie developers because they can see a nice realization of cash on the thing they've worked so hard for if they're looking for new opportunities.
Yeah. Is David from RevenueCat, I assume?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
I've talked
Who
to
better to
David before.
ask, right? Than
Right.
than David.
Speaking of a
those
startup
things.
with a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And he wrote a great post about it too. I don't remember if that was before or after we chat, but I know they have one on the RevenueCat blog about like, hey, do you want to have your app acquired? Here's some things to think about.
And we'll put a link to that in the show notes for sure.
Yeah.
One question I wanted to ask, and I'm not sure, I wasn't sure about this. Have you built apps for other platforms besides iOS?
No, I haven't. I've been all iOS since I got started. And I mean, technically I did some stuff with Unity, but I never shipped them. But yeah, iOS has been like I've pigeonholed myself into iOS on purpose, and I love it because now I can actually do macOS, tvOS, all the Apple OSs. But yeah, it's been all Apple for me. I started in the industry doing .NET.
Have you tried
different
macOS
platform?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yes, I have so this is funny. I have this little group chat on iMessage with other indie dads. Charlie's in there, probably some other folks that you might recognize on Twitter. And I've had this macOS app like done for a long time. That's like basically a product management software for me. And they keep, they're like, you need to ship that because I've shown little screenshots of it here and there. But yeah, so I've done quite a bit of macOS with that. I haven't touched it in a while because, I just now started on another indie app, so I haven't really needed it. But I would say the one that I really haven't done anything in earnest would be tvOS. Everything else, I've done something that's like been a fully realized product. watchOS, iPadOS, macOS, iOS. But yeah, tvOS is the only one I haven't really dabbled in.
Yeah. All right. So I want to talk about your book series.
Sure, let's do it.
Sorry.
No, it's all good.
So you've actually blogged quite a bit, and now you have this book series out, best in app
class, best in class iOS app.
Thank you. Sorry. So how do you think writing that book has helped you how has that helped you put into words what you've been doing for the last 5 years and help you refine your process?
Yeah. So, I mean, the short answer, it's helped a lot. I mean, for example, the first book I finished over accessibility was well over 300 pages. And the amount that I learned from writing that was enormous, right? And there's a big need for it. And one funny kind of example that I always give is the rotor control and accessibility API was released for SwiftUI either in iOS 15 or 14. It was fairly recent. And it showed up in the infamous word cloud thing of like what's new during the keynote. And the tweets for it were like, rotor control for SwiftUI. Like, what is this? That sounds awesome. Which was kind of funny because I don't think people realized that it was an accessibility API. Like, I think they thought it was some sort of UI control. And so like there's this big, I don't want to say big gap of what people need to learn or don't know on accessibility. I don't think that's it because people are willing to learn. But the world is so big that you kind of, I had a lot of fun in learning how to kind of bring that down a bit and kind of distill it all into some easy to understand examples and like chapters and things of that sort. So I would say I'm a much better accessibility programmer now than I was when I started. But in terms of like taking everything I've learned, it's been a lot of fun. It's been very hard, a lot harder than I thought. I knew that once SpendStack was acquired that I wanted to kind of flip to the other end of things and do more writing because I had missed writing a ton. When I was working in SpendStack, I didn't have a lot of time to write. And now that I'm writing, I don't have a ton of time to work on an app. So it's certainly a trade-off. But it was a now or never thing. I knew that if I started on another app, I was not going to do this book series. So I just kind of said, you know what? If there's a time to do it, it's definitely now when I'm in between apps. But it's fun, humbling, scary, all of those things, because you're writing a book series that you're saying a best-in-class iOS app. So you're saying this is how to make the best apps possible. And there are expectations with that. And there should be, because that's how I'm marketing it. But it does put a lot of internal pressure on myself to deliver, the best possible tangible, usable information that I can give you, right? Because I just don't want to write it to write it. I want to write it so you can take it and go, all right, here's something that I just read just now that maybe I could do a PR for or commit to my code base today to make the app better. So that's the goal with the book series. It's going along. It does content updates about every 2 weeks. But my goodness, I think after this book series is done, I don't think I'll do another one. So a lot of late nights and juggling priorities for sure. But hey, people like it, and that's really good. I'm glad that they do.
Yeah, I was just telling you, I looked over it last night and I was super impressed. We'll get into the design part, but the accessibility part, like you have a lot in there in that first book. What? Yeah, how did you were you always into accessibility, or was it something you're like, holy crap, like I need to invest more time in this because I am not serving my audience very well by not having all these accessibility features in there?
I think it was more about well, to answer like kind of where it came from, the overarching goal was of the book was to cover everything. So what was everything? Everything was four main components: accessibility, design, user experience, and then of course the iOS APIs. And so I just started at that first one, but the way that I found what to write on was kind of actually a funny story. I wrote a scraper for Apple's documentation and articles called the Daily iOS, which you may or may not have seen. But the way I found like the contents of the book along the way was that I used that scraper and I found every single piece of documentation and every single piece of text written about accessibility from Apple. And so I made sure that every single one of those topics was going to be covered and every single one of those APIs would be in there. And then once I did that, I made sure that all of them were written in both SwiftUI and UIKit where possible.
Yeah, I was really impressed with that, by the way, in the book. Like you break down everything UIKit and SwiftUI, which is super impressive. Even in this early of a where we're at with SwiftUI, to see all that accessibility stuff in there.
Yeah, and credit to Apple too. They've done an amazing job exposing those APIs. Going back to the rotor control, how easy it is to do in SwiftUI. It's almost criminal. Like it's almost to the point where if you don't have it, like you either forgot or just didn't care. Like it's so easy to get in there. But yeah, so I've learned a lot that way, and of course that's why it's taking so long to write the dang thing, because every code sample I have is effectively double. And some things obviously take a lot longer in UIKit. But, I think it's worth it because I want everyone to be able to take stuff from the book series, not just UIKit devs, not just SwiftUI, but both. Because much like the early days of Swift and Objective-C, there's both of those types of developers around, and they're going to be around for a very, very long time. So it was kind of the only way that I saw going forward. But that's also a big reason why I did early access, because I knew this book was going to take years to write. It's not a 1-year project. I'll have been working on it a year, I think, in May or August or something. So it's going to take a while, and things are going to change along the way. But yeah, I mean, accessibility is huge. Apple pushes it. I work at a place that allows us to take the time to develop it. And I think it's the highest impact area I can show people about now. Design is great. User experience is great. iOS APIs are great. But I just felt like accessibility was the right one to start with.
If there was one thing you want people to take away from your first book in the series with accessibility, what do you want that to be?
Yeah, I think it's empathy, if I had to get one word. And, it's easy to say in terms of accessibility, like, hey, it's the right thing to do. It's designed for everyone. And all those things are true. But, like, until you really stop to think about it and just put yourself in someone else's shoe, and I do write a little bit about this in the beginning or end, I can't remember. But, like, if you were blind, how would software be to you? What would it feel like? What would the experience be like? What would the difference be like to you? And the difference between you being able to use an app and not being able to use an app could be voiceover or voice control, or how well those APIs are implemented, if you use the right accessibility traits, all those things. So like, I think the part of the reason accessibility is so hard to hammer home to some people, or why it's maybe not as implemented as well as we wish that it would, is that you just haven't experienced the things that you're programming against, right? Like you may not have a motor disability. You might have great eyesight, right? You have all these things that make it to where you don't have to think about those APIs. But the people that need those APIs rely on them, like, and you can't express that enough. Like they need them. It's not optional. They can use the app or they can't use the app if those things work. So it's just getting to the point where hopefully if I posited my argument well enough in the book, you can look at yourself as an indie developer and say, you know what, I'm doing this because I want everyone to be able to use my app. Or if you work at a job and you need to kind of sell it, which, I mean, that's just the truth of the matter. Sometimes you have to sell this work, even though if it's the right thing to do. And even though you have all these arguments, you have to go to a PM or you have to go to your EM or you have to go to your boss and say, this is why I need time in the sprint to do it. I give some tips there too, like, hey, it's going to bring in more users. It's going to make us better than our competitors. Because it's the right thing, as we so often see in tech, won't really get you far sometimes, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, I hope it inspires people too to work on those things and not be intimidated by the APIs. They may seem big or confusing at first, but they're really easy to use. It's just about knowing that they're there. That's like half the battle.
Yeah, totally agree. All right, I want to get into the fun part. I want to talk about design. So, I've read this part of the book, but I'm going to ask anyways. Can you Can you learn design?
Yeah, so I think that's a very interesting question. So not only is that a chapter in the book, but it was a blog post that I wrote years ago. And the reason that I wrote it that way and the reason I titled it as a question is that's something that I really thought myself. Because the first things that held SpendStack version 1 back and the reason why it didn't succeed, whereas the second one did, was design. The design was it was bad. It wasn't good. It relied on gestures that weren't taught to people. The colors clashed. The contrast was crazy. It wasn't accessible. All these things. And it wasn't until I sat down and took design seriously that SpendStack went to the next level. And so I kind of use myself as living proof in a way. And not that I'm some design maestro or I've figured it all out, but I'm tangible proof, like almost irrefutable proof that I didn't know anything about design, and then I took the same app and I designed it better. So like the whole point of that topic was to show that, yes, like it doesn't matter where you're at or what your discipline is. Like you can learn design, you can get better at it. You may not be an expert, you may not know color theory or typography. I mean, I still struggle with those things as well, but like you can learn components and you can learn just enough to get a lot better. Like there's a lot of bang for your buck when it comes to design. Once you get some of the principles down and you really see what Apple is teaching in the human interface guidelines, you can really kind of get moving and improve things right away. So can you learn design? Absolutely.
One of the things you talk about, and I think it's interesting because I kind of agree with you, why you shouldn't start with design. You want to explain that a bit?
Yeah, so it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier on how like you need to know the what first. Like you need to know what you're designing and who you're designing it for before you go into it. And you know, I've got the scars from this one too. I've got excited about an app idea early on in my career and I just went for it. You know, Xcode's open, I'm banging away at the keyboard already. And then at that point, I don't even really know like exactly what the app is doing or who it's for or any of that. And again, if it's just for the love of the game type of thing and you just want to get that creative energy out, by all means, you know, you should do that. But for me, one of the lessons that I've always taken away from my projects is unless I define the what, unless I get this huge word cloud of ideas down and whittle it down into a few things, my design or my idea of what it should be is just going to be too obtuse, right? It's just a bit too abstract to get something tangible out the door. So when you kind of stop and pump the brakes a little bit, it kind of can kill that excitement, right? And you don't want that to happen. You want to get to that creative stuff to keep that going, but you've got to have a foundation first. So I think it's all about laying that foundation down and then designing for that foundation because you don't want to stop yourself and you don't want that creative energy to go away, but it will be wasted, in my opinion, in my experience, if you at least don't know what it is you're trying to go for, more or less.
So what are some ideas you have about like building that foundation, I guess?
Yeah, so the first thing for me is it all starts with like the elevator pitch. Like if I can't describe the app in one sentence, then I'm in trouble. And it almost kind of goes to the reason why the App Store has, I think it's a 60-character subtitle limit. So, and I think that's great because it kind of shows, can you explain this very quickly? Can you get the main idea across? And so when you do that, then you can kind of start building up from there. So that, like, if you're building a house, that's like your framing. That's your foundation right there is the app's mission statement, that elevator pitch, the one sentence, maybe two of what it's going to do. And then from there, you start putting on the support beams, as it were, of what supports that foundation, you know? So if I'm making this app that's, you know, about
recording podcasts like this Riverside app that we're using right now. It's like, okay, so what's it going to do? Okay, I've got the main idea. What makes it different? Then you kind of start peeling back the layers. Like, is there enough there for me to improve upon what's already out there? Do I have enough interesting things to say about it to make it better? And so, yeah, you kind of get the big idea and you build it up and you make it stronger and stronger. It's like you're presenting a case to, a court and jury or something. It's like you're getting all these facts together, you're kind of gathering them up, and then it's like, bam, now I've got something that's a bit real and I can start the design process from there.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot. Because like you said, like if you don't have an audience and if you can't explain it in one sentence, you have a problem. You're trying to do something way too complicated, at least for an MVP anyways.
Yeah.
One of the things you talked about, and I love this, was the difference between a high fidelity and a low fidelity design. I think I am probably leaning towards low fidelity myself. And we can explain that. We can explain that a little bit further. But part of it is one of the issues like designers have, especially people who aren't familiar with iOS, is they'll design an app because like they design a web page, right? And they just think everything's going to be custom. We're going to do custom this, custom nav bar, everything that they don't have an idea of what's like, A, what's easy to do, and B, what's like typical on the Apple platform. Whereas with like a low fidelity design, I'm restricted by programming within that framework. And then if I need to customize things further, I can do that myself if I feel like there's a need for that. Where do you stand, and maybe explain like the pros and cons of each?
Yeah. So to kind of define them, in my terms, I explain high fidelity as like the picturesque golden path. Everything's designed in like Sketch or Figma. Like you've got the whole blueprint there. Whereas the low fidelity is just like you're sketching something on paper or using Procreate or some kind of tool to just kind of get the wireframes out. And so I kind of think of those as two viable options, and I think they both have their places, but I do think it's going to be different for everybody. So that's kind of where I kind of split from other design texts out there. Some kind of take you one way or the other and say, this is the next step. Whereas for me, it's like, I may not need a full-on sketch canvas of everything to get going.
Right.
If it's just me, I don't. And there's a lot of reasons. One, I'm not really that talented in those programs. I'm not going to make something that looks great. Even if you gave me an app and told me to make that in Sketch, like if you did the reverse, my Sketch one would still be worse because like I'm just not that great at using those.
Like I've downloaded those iOS like libraries from Apple for Sketch, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do this, and I'm like, but why can't I do this? Why can't I put this toolbar there? It's so much easier in SwiftUI. It's like
No, you're completely right. And it kind of goes to your experience and your biases. Designers are probably geared for that. Like, that's their Xcode, right? They're great at that. So they may go that path. But for a lot of developers, I kind of wanted to encourage and let them know that, like, you don't need that whole thing. What you need is the flow kind of nailed down and where the app's going to go and a lightweight kind of blueprint of how it's going to work. So funny enough, where I fall on that, I should have added this to the book and I might in an update. But I kind of land in, like, mid fidelity. So like I have high and I have low. Like I'll make a sketch file, but it's not going to look picturesque. It's just going to kind of have like the color palette and how I want.
You're probably a little bit forgiving towards yourself for what you actually put in the app. Where it's like, okay, I didn't get this exact color, but close enough. Like, or I didn't get this pixel perfect because it looks different on this phone as opposed to that phone. Yeah. Okay.
And I think high fidelity is really great for typography. So like, if you want to know how dynamic type's going to look, you can do that really easily. And Apple's UI kit kind of helps with that. But, you got to be really forgiving of yourself at that stage and kind of know your limitations. And like even my sketches that I put in the book, like that's actually what I use. Like I didn't really almost do that for example's sake, just for the example. I was trying to show like this is actually like good enough for me. And this is how I made SpendStack, right? Like I just had some wireframes. Things aren't even lined up perfectly, but it's enough for me to get started and start developing. So you really kind of have this fork in the road path in your development journey where you kind of know, I think, even when you get there, which way you're going to go. But I do encourage people to try both because you learn things along the way from either path that you can take to one or the other.
Yeah, I really wish I was better at Sketch and like using those app design, like the what's it called? Like the library that you can get from Apple. Where you can like put little things. And I just
components.
have like, yeah. I just have such a hard time with it where I'm just like I just want to open up a SwiftUI file and work on live previews.
Yeah.
Like,
you get into the symbols and all that stuff, and you're like, oh wait,
right.
I'm detaching this. Am I breaking something? So it's so fun to talk about because it's just not really our world, right? Like if you start as a developer primarily, so like it's this other discipline that you kind of have to learn, and design certainly is a brand new discipline, and that's just one of the tools that comes with it. So yeah, that's why you should give yourself a break, and if that's not the way for you to go, just make sure that you do put a lot of thought into that process. But if it's drawing on a pen and paper, then cool, do it.
One of the things you talk about in the book that I hadn't thought of is tone. What do you mean by tone exactly? Are you talking like tone in your wording and design, or tone in how you're marketing the app, or what do you mean? And what are some examples of differences, I guess?
Yeah, so tone is such a fun one. I love thinking about it. So the way I explain it is like you're kind of finding your app's voice, and your app's voice isn't just like the text or the copy. It's like the whole feel and experience of the app, all the way down from the marketing, the land page, the colors, the app store, descriptions, and screenshots of the app. So the reason it pays to think about all those things is you want to be consistent there, and you don't really want to mix and match tones. And so the way that I kind of went about it is I said, hey, here's what tone is. Here's how it shows up in apps. Here's where you see it, even if you don't realize you're seeing it. Here's how you can affect it. Now let's look at some examples so you can really see like what I mean by this. And so like you have like the casual tone, which you can think of Apple for that, right? They have the biggest user pool on the planet, right? Well, I mean, Android, I guess technically has more installs, but the point still stands. Like 1 billion people use Calendar, for example. So how do you design Calendar for like every person on the planet? Well, you can't be really too opinionated in your tone. It has to be open and inviting for everyone to kind of get in there and get a feel for it. Whereas if you look at other players in the market, they may have a more different tone. So like Fantastical, maybe more power user, right? Because if someone goes and looks for a different calendar in the App Store, they've probably tried the stock one and thought, this isn't for me. I need something more powerful.
Right. Yep.
So they can, cater to those people a bit more. And then one of my favorite examples is, of course, Christian Selig's Apollo. He has one of the most unique tones I've ever seen in an app where the tone is almost literally him. It's not Reddit. Like you feel like you're friends with Christian when you use Apollo. Like his error message is really like, oh crap, like I screwed this up or something like that. But it's endearing, right? And people love it for that. And they just feel like you're sitting down, hanging out with Christian, browsing Reddit. And that's his tone, and it works really well. So it's like you can look at all those examples and figure out the right one for you and for your app. And when you stick to it and make it consistent, it really helps you make a lot of decisions, and it helps you do the one thing you don't want to do, which is mix and match tones, because that's really off-putting and can be really confusing. And when you see it in apps, you know it. Like if you get an error message in an all business app that's like, oh, shucks. You're like, shucks? Like, are we buddies now? Like, what is this invoicing app? This is weird.
It's like the fast food corporate Twitter thing where they're like being all sarcastic. That's been a thing for like the last whatever half decade, where they hire some kid to do it, and it's like it's funny at first, but now it's like it's not funny anymore because everybody does it.
Yeah, it's like my McRib is making jokes at me like this. I don't know what's going on here.
Yeah, exactly. So was there anything else you wanted to talk about before we close out?
Hey, this was a ton of fun. I didn't have anything in particular. Just always happy to answer questions, and this is all the stuff I love talking about. Design, apps, indie stuff. It's always a pleasure.
So I'll ask one last question.
Yeah, do it.
Before we close out, what is the number one thing you think devs should know about marketing their app and that process?
That they should do it, actually. Because when you're getting your first app out the door, you have this kind of dream that like, I'm going to get this on the App Store. It's going to shoot up. I'm going to get downloads. And it's a valuable lesson to learn if you've done that. And this is all from experience. I'm not saying this is what every developer does on their first app. But marketing doesn't just happen, and you can't really learn from the people that have had that experience because it's not really repeatable. They don't really have a framework. It was a flash in the pan. It was a stroke of luck. Not that they're not talented, but it's just like something happened that's not normal. So like you need to think about things that you can do that are repeatable, that are like actionable, and things that you can learn. So just marketing is a big topic, but just think about it at least. Like when my app's out there, put yourself in other people's shoes. How would I ever find your app? What I want, and if I did find it, is the screenshots you've given me, the descriptions you've written. Do they make me actually want to try it? Do they make me want to download it? All of those things matter, because one of the things that happens with developers is we're great at writing software. We solve all these brilliant technical challenges, and then we spend 5 minutes on the App Store marketing. So it's like if you bought a business, like if you were opening a clothing shop, it's like you have the best products in the world, but it's all in the back, and you just have the tiny open sign that you don't even have the name of the store. It's like no one's coming in, no one's going to buy it. It's not that your product isn't good. It's just that people don't understand it. They don't know about it. You haven't sold it to them. So, be ready to try and sell your app. Enjoy that first rush of downloads if you get it from a nice launch, and I hope that everyone does. But there's life after that, and that's where you're going to spend the majority of your lifespan of indie life, is in that next section of trying to get things in people's hands with your app and trying to figure out ways to do that. So think about marketing. It's not scary. It's something you can learn. Be ready to spend some of your proceeds on it even, really try and think about it critically and realistically.
And I would say like marketing and developing should go like hand in hand. I wouldn't wait until you have it in the App Store to market the app. I would even do it sooner if you can.
Yes. And the good thing with marketing is it's never too late to start. So like even if you did have it out in the App Store and you didn't tell a soul, hey, you know what? You can start marketing it today. So you can always get going with it.
Yeah, agreed. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been fantastic to have you on again.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for having me. My virtual door is always open.
Where can people find you online?
Yeah. So Twitter @JordanMorgan10. My website, where I'm trying to write weekly, do a lot better job of that, is SwiftJectiveC, Swift and Objective-C mashed together. And of course, the book series you can find at bestinClassIOSapp.com.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
people can find me on Twitter @LeoGDion. My company is Bright Digit. Please take some time to like and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or post a review, Apple Podcast, Google, Spotify, wherever you're listening. Thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to talking to you again. Bye.